Welcome to Study Time, a televised home learning program produced by Rwanda Basic Education Board.
Hello student, welcome to the TV learning programs. I'm Teacher Herbert, as my name's. I'll be taking you through the biology and health science of Senior 2, Unit 3. And the Unit 3 is concerning about passive movement of substances across the cell membrane. So that is the unit we're going to discuss today with you, Unit 3, which is concerning about the passive movement of substances across the cell membrane. So, student, welcome to the lesson of today, which is concerning about passive movement of substances across the cell membrane. So, before we start our lesson, I welcome you all to the lesson of today. But before we start our lesson, I would like everybody to get a pen, an exercise book, a notebook, and you note some important concept and important word I'm going to be mentioning in the unit. So, student, let's start. As you know that our body is made up of cells that carry out several metabolic and physiological processes, and in order to carry the life processes of life. So our cells, they have to carry out metabolic processes, physiological processes, in order for a cell to survive. And a cell has to be provided with very many materials if a cell is to survive. So these nutrients, they can just move into or out of the cell by passive process or by active processes. So I'm going to tell you that we can say in various substances, some of which waste products can just be removed from the body, and I can say and other products and other useful substances can also enter into our body. The useful substances are transferred to cells where they need for important metabolic processes. Therefore, substances always move into and out of the cell by using these passive processes or active processes. And you can say the way substances move into and out of the cell depends on certain properties. You can talk about the size of the particle, you can talk about the distances, and etc. And you know, when I talk about the plasma membrane, sometimes the plasma membrane is called a selective permeable membrane. All right? You can say plasma membrane, let me talk about that, plasma membrane. Or cell membrane. Cell membrane is selectively permeable. If I say selectively permeable, it means that it can control, the entry of substances and out of the body. All right? You can say here is a list of the passive processes. Examples of passive processes that occurs in our body. Passive processes. If I say passive processes, let me say passive transport or passive transport. If I say what is passive transport, who can define for me what is a passive transport? What do you understand by passive transport? In biology, when I say a passive transport, it means the movement of molecules along electronic gradient does not require energy. Okay? So it does not require energy. There's no production of energy, all right? Here is the definition. Take the definition. You can say it involves the movement of molecules. We can talk about molecules or ions, stroke ions, along you can say along electronic gradient, electrochemical gradient without the use of ATP. If I say ATP, most of you can ask yourself, what is ATP? It is adenosine triphosphate. If I say adenosine triphosphate, it means when you get a diphosphate plus another phosphate, you get a triphosphate, ATP. So that is energy production that is going to be produced. And you can say downhill transport, okay? That is downhill transport. Examples, we can have examples of active transport, examples of passive transport, examples of passive transports. Examples of passive transports, we have one, we have diffusion. We have number two, which is osmosis. Then three, we have facilitated diffusion. All right. When we talk about these processes, we talked about passive movement. It involves the movement of molecules or ions or particles or gases along electronic gradient without the use of ATP. They don't use ATP. They don't use energy. That form of energy called it to be adenosine triphosphate. And I said when you get a diphosphate plus one phosphate group, diphosphate. If you get a diphosphate plus another phosphate, you get what you call a triphosphate. Okay? A diphosphate plus another phosphate, you get what you call a triphosphate. Examples of passive transport, we have diffusion, we have osmosis, we have facilitated diffusion. Students, let's start with the diffusion. Number one, let's start with diffusion. Diffusion is an example of passive transport. If I say passive transport, that one means the movement of molecules or ions or gases, they don't require energy. Okay? They move from higher concentration to lower concentration. Let me just use an example of diffusion. I have something you can see. Let me say this is a deodorant or a perfume. If you say a deodorant from in your room, it sprays from one region to another region. There's two differences in regions. It has moved from higher concentration to lower concentration. That is an example of diffusion. Spraying a deodorant in your room is an example of diffusion. Let me also use another example. I will be having water, and I add, if I get water, this is water, and then I add potassium permanganate. As an example, I add the crystals of potassium permanganate. If you add the potassium permanganate in water, what will happen? I get the crystals of potassium permanganate. If I get the crystals, these are crystals of potassium permanganate. If I get these crystals of potassium permanganate and I put it into water, you can see they are going to dissolve. They're going to dissolve. The color will just reach to what you call uniformly distributed. Uniformly distributed. It will move from higher concentration to lower concentration. What does it mean? We're going to get the definition of diffusion. So here you can see the potassium permanganate is moving from higher concentration to lower concentration across the concentration gradient. All right? So when you spread a deodorant in your room, then in a few minutes or in a few seconds, in the room, the whole of the room will be sprayed with the deodorant. What does it mean? It means the deodorant will just move from higher concentration to lower concentration. Here is the definition of of diffusion. Get the definition. Definition. Say it is the net movement of particles, let's say we have ions, we have molecules, we have gases, from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration down the concentration gradient, down the concentration gradient. If I say down the concentration gradient, what does it mean? What do you understand by concentration gradient? What is concentration gradient? What is concentration gradient? Concentration gradient refers to the differences in concentration. In concentration, let me just say maybe an example. I have a box. The box I have, which is partially, it is selectively permeable. It is selectively permeable. On one side, I can say, on one side I have more solutes. This one indicates the solutes. All right? There are more solutes. There are more solutes here. There are more solutes on that region. I can call it to be this is A and this is B. These are more solutes. And here there is less water. There is less water. On that side, on B, I have less solutes in number compared to A. If you are trying to see, there are more solutes on that side, but there is more water here on that side. Now, the solute will move from high concentration and they dose with water, dosing with water. What will happen? They will move from higher concentration to lower concentration, meaning that A is higher concentrated, then B is lower concentrated. But they are going to move from a concentration gradient where there is a difference between two regions. There is a difference in concentration between A and B. A has got high concentration, and then B has got lower concentration. Good. Let's talk about, you can say, after moving, we can say, you can also add something, you can say, as a result of random movement. You can say, it is the net movement of particles or ions or molecules or gases from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration down the concentration gradient as a result of random movement. Because the particles, they are moving randomly. They are colliding with one another. And that one makes to be uniformly distributed till when the equilibrium is reached. When they are moving, they reach a time when the equilibrium is reached. All right? Let me talk about the factors now. Let me talk about the factors. Factors that affects the rate of diffusion. The rate of diffusion. What are the factors that can affect the rate of diffusion? Students, think about it, and we come up with the answers to tell me what are the factors that can affect the rate of diffusion. What are the factors that affect the rate of diffusion? Good. We are saying that there are some of the factors that can affect the rate of diffusion is, we can say, number one is A, is temperature. That is number one, that is A. B, another factor which can affect the rate of diffusion, we can talk about the concentration gradient. Concentration gradient. concentration gradient. Number 3, another factor which can affect the rate of diffusion. We can talk about the size of the molecule. C, the size of the molecule. The molecules, or can call it to be particles, the size of the molecules or particles. Then D, we can talk about the distance, the diffusion distances. Diffusion distance. Good, excellent for telling me about that. We talk about another one, which is the last one. This is D, then D, E. You can have what you call surface area to the volume ratio. Surface, I like that word. Surface area to the volume ratio. Volume ratio. So there are a number of factors that can affect the rate of diffusion. I started with the temperature. I talked about concentration gradient, size of the molecule or particles, diffusion distance, and also talk about surface area to the volume ratio. Let me start with the temperature. When I talk about temperature, most of the reactions are sped up. They are speed up by increasing the temperature. Once you're increasing the temperature, the kinetic energy increases. And once kinetic energy increases, it increases, the molecules will collide with one another. And they may be able to move from one area to another area. You can say, when the temperature of the particles is high, that's what I want to mean. When the temperature is very high, the kinetic energy increases and the particles move very fast. That one means when the kinetic energy increases, the particles will move very fast because they what we call correlation. If I say kinetic energy, that is energy for movement. And I can say the faster the particle will diffuse. As you're increasing the temperature, the faster the rate of diffusion because the particles will collide and they will move very fast. All right? Take that note. Take a note about that. And say temperature, A is temperature. I said, you say, this is when, this is the, no, you say, when temperature is increased, let me write for that one. When temperature is increased of a particles is high, their kinetic energy increases, and if they increases and increase the particles to move faster. As you increase the temperature, you're increasing the rate of diffusion because as the kinetic energy increases, you're increasing the particles to move very fast. That means that the faster the particles will diffuse. As temperature increases, the particles will diffuse very fast. As temperature is very low, the rate of diffusion is very low, all right? So the rate of diffusion increases with temperature. As temperature is very high, the rate of diffusion is very high. As temperature is very low, the rate of diffusion is very low. Number 2, talk about concentration gradient. Concentration gradient, you can say this is the differences in the amount of particles present in the two regions. I can say, as there is the differences in concentration, I told you the differences in concentration. If I say differences in concentration, it means that if the differences is very big, the faster the rate of diffusion. I can say the greater the differences in concentration of particles between two regions result into a steeper concentration gradient. As the steeper concentration gradient is, the faster the rate of diffusion. As the shallow concentration gradient it is, the slower the rate of diffusion. So the bigger differences in concentration, the faster the rate of diffusion. All right. Let me just tell you another one, which is another one is size of the particle. The size of the particle. If I say the size of the particle, size, that is C, size of the particles. You know, smaller particles, they move very fast. Large particles or heavy particles, they move very slow. So the smaller the size of the particle is, the faster the rate of diffusion. But the larger the particle or the heavier the particle is, the slower the rate of diffusion. Take a note about this. You can say, larger molecules are heavy, and will diffuse at a slower rate compared to smaller molecules, which are lighter. So it means that the heavier the molecules is, the larger the molecules, or the heavier the molecules is, the slower the rate of diffusion. The smaller the molecules is in terms of the particles, the faster the rate of diffusion. Another one is the distances in the diffusion distances. Diffusion distance. Let's have another one which is called diffusion distance. Diffusion distance, which is D. D is a diffusion distance. Diffusion distance. If I say diffusion distance, what does it mean? It means that the rate of diffusion depends on the distance that the particles have to travel. The particles have to travel a large distance, okay? The slower the rate of diffusion. The smaller the distance, the faster the rate of diffusion. But if the molecules are going to travel a long distance, that one will affect the rate of diffusion. So it means that the rate of diffusion depends on the distance the particles have to travel in order to be unevenly distributed with the available space. But it means that the rate of diffusion depends on the distance the particles have to travel in order to be evenly distributed with available space. So it means the smaller the distance, the faster the rate of diffusion. The longer the distance the particles has to travel, the slower the rate of diffusion. So another one, I'm going to talk about the surface area, which is the last one among the factors which affect the rate of diffusion. Another one is what we call the size of what we call surface area to the volume ratio. Surface area to the volume ratio. Yes. Surface area, that is D, that is E. Surface area to the volume ratio. If I say that one to the volume ratio, what does it mean? It means that the smaller the surface area, and the larger the surface area, the larger the surface area, the faster rate of diffusion. The smaller the surface area, the slower the rate of diffusion. I will use example. Amoeba is a single-celled organism, and it has got a thin membrane. The thinner the membrane, the faster the rate of diffusion. The thicker the membrane is, the slower the rate of diffusion. So we consider the surface area. Take an example, human being has got small surface area to the volume ratio. But amoeba has got a large surface area to the volume ratio. It is small in volume, but large in surface area. So it normally facilitates the process of diffusion. Let's talk about the importance of diffusion. Importances of diffusion. What are the importances of diffusion? Importances of diffusion. Importances of diffusion. What does diffusion helps us? Because diffusion is very important, because this one I can call it to be a competence knowledge subject, because it tells us where I can just apply diffusion in our daily life processes, all right? Diffusion is used in very many processes. It is used, number one, used by the plants. Plants to absorb water and mineral salts, and oxygen, without forgetting oxygen, from the soil through root hair cells, root hair by diffusion. So they absorb water and oxygen and mineral salt by means of diffusion. Number two, another function of diffusion. Another function of diffusion, it is used. Another one is another function of diffusion. Another function of diffusion is digested, that's supposed to be B. Digested food is absorbed in the small intestine, in small intestines by diffusion process. Three, which is C, cells, take an example, cells, and unicellular organisms. Get rid of waste products from their bodies, and also absorbing oxygen from the surrounding environment, from the surrounding environment. Good. So before I wind up, I also have to talk about osmosis. What is osmosis? Osmosis, which is very good. Osmosis is also a net movement. The definition here is the net movement. Osmosis is the net movement of particles that's supposed to be ions or molecules from a higher concentration, we can talk about from high water potential to a raw water potential across a partially permeable membrane, a partially permeable, partially permeable membrane. So when we talk about osmosis, we don't talk about concentration, we talk about water potential. So I can say osmosis is the net movement of particles or ions from high water potential to low water potential across a partially permeable membrane or selectively permeable membrane. When we talk about osmosis, which is a passive process, we don't talk about concentration of water. We talk about water potential. So thank you for being with me in the lesson, and I hope we are going to discuss next lesson about facilitated diffusion. Thank you for being with me.